You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. Storm trackers around the world have yet another hurricane to track in the Atlantic, and unfortunately for Central America it's another one to prepare for as best they can ahead of what could be a catastrophic hurricane landfall from Iota this evening. Currently estimated winds of 90 miles per hour, a pressure around 972 millibars. But wait till you see the latest satellite imagery. We're awaiting new data from Recon, which will be in the next 2 hours. But until then, it's probably going to remain a Category 1 officially, although it looks extremely good on the close-up satellite, which we'll show you in just a moment. I'm slightly happier to tell you that it's the only system that we're really watching right now. Bamco has died off over northern Vietnam. Alicia is thankfully out to sea in the South Indian Ocean, but it is a Category 1, 80 miles per hour. And so we home in on this storm, which has been exhibiting its eye a little bit in the last couple of hours. My name is Nathan Foy. I'm joined by my team as always, consisting tonight of Amy, Cesar, Jacob, Kay, Strat and Thomas. Good evening to all of you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So a busy night in store, I would think, especially with this storm intensifying like it is. Kay, you've been watching it all day, and you're one of the people who, been watching it extremely closely. And I think you might have the most balance on your thoughts.
Yes. Well, it's been a confusing storm because the satellites and the recon data would be suggesting one thing, and then the next mission would come in and we'd find something different to what we're expecting. We had a drop of 4 millibars in just an hour and 20 minutes in the earlier reconnaissance mission at around 6 UTC, which is now 14 hours ago, 16 hours ago.
You're talking about 6 a.m. Wow.
Yeah. That suggested a rapidly intensifying system. And so based off of that, I assumed that the pressure would be into the low 970s when the next mission arrived 12 hours later. Turns out it only dropped 8 millibars in that time and hadn't technically even rapidly deepened or intensified.
It's really fascinating given its appearance.
Yeah. And the satellite appearance was incredible. And then people who've been watching it will have noted that around 5 hours ago, the deep convection, the minus 70s and 80s, 90s, almost all completely died off.
Okay, we've seen Category 4s look worse than this.
I'm going to be honest with you, yes we have. And
So
that's the
where
concerning
does that
thing.
leave us? You know, well...
It leaves us waiting for
It
reconnaissance
leaves us
to tell us what the
speechless
storm's actually doing.
until they arrive.
It's a bit of a conundrum in that regard, because we've seen recent storms in a similar position, at least, look what you would assume to be far stronger on satellite imagery, than have recon come in and undercut it. You know, not just Eta, just under 2 weeks ago, but Iota itself this morning, before it kind of had that phase where its core got a bit more disrupted, it was looking, substantially better and had that 90 mile an hour status from the National Hurricane Center. Recon only found 80 mile an hour winds. So it's a bit of wait and see with the data that we're probably going to get in the next 2 hours right now. But suffice to say, the storm's looking much more impressive than earlier, and that just emphasizes the risk it's bringing to land in less than 2 days.
Now on this graphic you can see the center of the storm, of course, the eye, and its expanding eye wall by the looks of things. On the western side You can see some blue outlines, some islands there, just to point out what islands they are. The northern one there, that's sort of roundish or square perhaps, is Providencia. They're under a hurricane warning. Further south you've got San Andres, so when you hear the National Hurricane Center talk about those islands, the blue outlines on the map right now. And a hurricane warning is in effect for Providencia. Still a hurricane watch at San Andres. And then as we look further on, looking at the National Hurricane Center's forecast cone, they're expecting a major hurricane, by the way, and soon. Hurricane warning also in effect for the coast of Nicaragua from the border with Honduras to Sandy Bay Serpi, and the coast of northeastern Honduras from Punta Patuca to the Honduras-Nicaragua border. A tropical storm warning also for San Andres and the coast of Nicaragua from south of Sandy Bay Serpi to Blue Fields, and the northern coast of Honduras from west of Punta Patuca to Punta Castilla. So the storm with an increasing wind field by the looks of things as well, and increasing chances for a lot of places. But the biggest threat from this storm is still going to be the rainfall in most situations, you would think.
Yeah, and that's why there's already a lot of evacuation orders in place, even in some areas that you wouldn't really expect just by looking at the forecast cone and seeing the weakening inland, and then the coastal warnings currently in place in Honduras and Nicaragua. There are evacuation orders in portions of Guatemala ahead of the system because of the rainfall threat that this is bringing. You're talking mountainous areas here that can receive up to another meter of rain or so if they get unlucky in local areas, and more widespread totals above 400 to 500 millimeters. So you've seen a lot of evacuation orders come in place ahead of time from local officials. We saw some of those images yesterday and 2 days ago, but there are expanded evacuations now in both Honduras, Nicaragua, and even Guatemala ahead of this system. And it wouldn't be surprising to see some of those get more information about El Salvador as well, just because of the rainfall threat this is posing to areas that are already very saturated after the torrential rainfall totals brought by Eta just about 2 weeks ago.
Now, people often hear us talking about eye temperature, and that's usually an indicator, not a exact indicator, but of sorts of how strong a storm might be based on satellite estimates on their own, as well as the eye wall, of course. Well, the eye temperature recently peaked at minus 17 degrees. It now appears to be, I don't want to say going away. That's how it appears on the satellite, but it's probably been obscured by clouds. With an eye temperature so warm and cloud tops into the minus 80s widespread, do we think it's a matter of time until the winds catch up?
Fortunately, that's a yes. I think that there is a fair chance, and I think that it's important to note to viewers that this very well could have winds that are already significantly stronger than are currently estimated. We don't actually know, but we'll be getting some recon data here within the next, I think it's going to be hour or so. About an hour from now, we'll start getting our first recon fixes and really get a much better idea as to just how strong this storm is.
As always, we'll be here to take questions. Start your message with Force 13 all in text on the YouTube comment section, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. Here is some questions that are literally coming in right now. Can Theta regenerate? It's the first one. No. Is there a cold trail from Eta a couple of weeks ago?
There is a cold air trail, but it's still definitely enough to support a Category 5, so I wouldn't call it a cold trail.
I mean, pretty much where it is up to landfall for Iota, you're talking in between 28 and 29 degrees Celsius waters and pretty deep ocean heat content. If this were, let's say a system out, close to the Bahamas and the previous storm was Eta, then you'd see a much more noticeable cold trail, especially at this time of year. But the ocean heat content there is high enough to where, despite there being some impact, it's much more minimal.
Another question about how low is the wind shear right now. Well, I can tell you by the looks of things, we're really getting in right now. This moment pretty much is the hottest point that this storm's got right now, the lowest amount of wind shear. It will rise modestly over the next 24 to 48 hours, but it won't get above 10 knots until we get to Tuesday at least.
unfortunately, it looks like this storm has virtually perfect conditions ahead of it. The only thing that's really going to stop it is itself, and given that it has not single, not double, but triple outflow, and it's already beginning to get a clearing eye after we saw just a little bit ago 90-mile-an-hour winds. I mean, it's looking like it's begun to intensify pretty quickly here. And we're going to find out really what's going on here in about an hour. I mean, I think that this recon is going to be crucial in our future predictions for this storm.
Oh, absolutely. Just to comment on how ridiculous the satellite presentation is. 5 hours ago, before this recent cold convection refired, it was the satellite estimates, the automated Dvorak, were around 80, 85 miles an hour. The raw values currently coming in are 130 to 140 miles an hour.
And I'm not surprised if you take a look at this storm on face value without any prior knowledge of its intensity to date. You say eyeballing it, that may well be a Cat 4. Probably isn't at this point, but it's getting there.
Yeah, well, I would say that even if the pressures of a Category 4, the winds are unlikely to be, because there hasn't been enough time for them to get up to speed.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a system that the last recon passes was finding closer to 80 miles an hour. So, based on what we're seeing, it's not impossible whatsoever to see a 25, maybe 30 knot jump in 6 hours, which is extraordinary. But the appearances really caught up after it was looking much more disheveled this morning. But at the same time, just based on that slower rise than some were expecting based on its appearance earlier today, it is possible that trend's maintained itself. But you're still looking at a situation nonetheless where this system has rapidly intensified in the past 24 hours in terms of its wind speed and pressure, and it's going to likely continue to do so at least during the next 24 hours as it approaches the coast.
We've also got Cesar with us tonight. Cesar, it's been a little while since we last spoke, but you're over there in Mexico, and you want to tell us a little bit about what these areas will be expecting, because the amount of heavy rainfall sounds pretty diabolical.
Absolutely, Nathan. Good afternoon to everybody. And well, unfortunately, the southern part of Mexico is very vulnerable for heavy rains and mudslides, landslides, which is a main cause of high amounts of fatalities. And well, Iota, it's expected to cross practically all over the Central America and dissipate over the southern part of Mexico possibly in the next, what you can say, 5 days possibly. So the scenario is completely bad for those regions. We had Hurricane Eta 2 weeks ago. The people are not really prepared for another very intense hurricane. I don't remember the last time we had practically 2 hurricanes in a very short span of time of that intensity in Central America and the south part of Mexico as well. So, well, unfortunately, it's going to be a really bad situation, and well, I can say that the mudslides, landslides, and very bad flooding is going to be the main problem with those countries and regions.
Now, rainfall estimates from the National Hurricane Center are as follows. Iota expects to produce the following rainfall accumulations through Friday morning: Honduras, northern Nicaragua, Guatemala, southern Belize, 8 to 16 inches, that's 200 to 400 millimeters. Isolated maximums of 20 to 30 inches, that's 500 to 750 millimeters, will be possible, especially from northeast Nicaragua into northern Honduras. Costa Rica and Panama, 4 to 8 inches, that's 100 to 200 millimeters, with isolated maximums of 12, that's 300 millimeters. This rainfall would lead to significant life-threatening flash flooding and river flooding, along with mudslides in areas of higher terrain. El Salvador and southern Nicaragua, 3 to 5 inches there, with isolated maximums of 10 inches, 250 millimeters. Northern Colombia still an additional 1 to 3 inches, that's 25 to 75 millimeters, with isolated maximums near 12 inches. 300 millimeters even there. And also they're now pointing out the National Hurricane Center storm surge, life-threatening, will raise water levels by as much as 10 to 15 feet above normal tide levels in areas of onshore winds along the coast of Nicaragua and Honduras. So if it wasn't bad enough with the rainfall, you've also got potentially a 15-foot storm surge.
Yeah, and to Cesar's point too about the unusual nature of having two storms of similar intensity, I mean, more likely than not Category 4 landfall in the same region of either northern Nicaragua, southern Honduras, and then moving through Central America like this in such a short time span is really rare, and not to mention the unprecedented nature that in this particular location of the basin where Iota is right now, this is the first time in recorded history there's actually been a hurricane-strength storm here at this point in the year or later. Ottawa is further south a bit later in the year, but at this particular location and anywhere west towards landfall, this is the first time there's been a hurricane this late in the year, let alone a potential major hurricane. And that really serves the point to tell people that this is a really dangerous situation. A lot of people focus on the winds in that regard, but I mean, like you said, reading out those rainfall totals, a lot of those are going over areas that are very saturated and haven't really been able to properly have time to recover from Eta just a couple weeks ago. So the impacts can be easily exacerbated by the ground just being so wet still and saturated from all the rainfall just a couple weeks ago.
We've got a few questions here. Some of them are quite important, I think, for the viewer's perspective. And the first one I just saw there is, what is the difference between normal outflow and triple outflow?
Yes.
Okay.
It's something that has happened with this storm is it's had well-established triple outflow in the upper levels, and that basically means that rather than the average for an intense storm, which is to have two outflow channels, one towards the equator and one towards the poles, this storm has three outflow channels. I believe it's one to the north, one to the southeast, and one to the southwest, although they might have shifted since the last time I checked. What that means is that this storm has an incredible capability to remove the convective air from the system after it rises in the hot towers and eye wall, and just get it away from the system, and that makes it easier for convection to sustain and encourages intensification, basically.
That's clearly happening, isn't it?
Yes, definitely it's happening.
Certainly looking at the clouds. What about the system northeast of Frederico? Well, here's the wide shot right now. Last week, models were suggesting just the tiny glimmer of a chance that that thing could become a tropical cyclone near the Bahamas. Haven't seen anything on that since. It does look a little bit interesting. There's a bit of rotation, no convection though. I don't think it's going to become anything, but again, watch out behind even Iota. There could be another system on the way. Models were more sure about that a few days ago. They're a little less so now. Maybe it's the case where a weak system forms out of it in the end, but we'll see. Could be yet another name on that list.
Yeah, and at least for that potential upcoming one, it's 20% in the next 5 days now for the National Hurricane Center, so they have noted it. I think the only major model that really develops it right now is the GFS as a tropical storm, a very small one, right before coming onshore in southern Nicaragua or in Costa Rica. But, I mean, regions there that have been not getting as major impacts from either Eta or Iota right now, but still getting substantial rainfall totals, should keep an extra eye out on that, because even if it doesn't form, you could be still seeing some enhanced rainfall totals from that system.
Let's take a little look around the world just for everyone's peace of mind. The Eastern Pacific looking like this today. I don't think many people will be surprised, having seen this season, that the Eastern Pacific area of interest is now down to 40% when it was 70% yesterday. I'd personally have it at about 10% probably, because the Eastern Pacific has been a massive failure this year. Not that it wasn't expected. the Western Pacific, what's left of Vamco there over northern Vietnam, just about into China as well. Behind it, not much else. There is a very weak disturbance that's about to move in towards the Philippine Islands. And looking out right over the Pacific, nothing else there for the time being. South Pacific, starting to get a little bit stormy, but nothing to suggest that we'll be seeing an actual tropical cyclone there anytime soon. And if I cross over here, eventually, I imagine this won't work because usually it doesn't first time. No, we don't have it just yet, but in a moment I'll show you the southwest Indian Ocean, what we can see from the Himawari satellite. But someone did point out there are two systems down there now. Alicia, which is a category 1, we've given it 80 miles per hour. And another system which we tagged as a tropical storm earlier today. I'm not actually sure what the stance is from the officials at Meteo France. They've actually marked it as a depression now down there. So they've called it a depression and they expect it to stay that way. But a pretty quick start to the southern Indian Ocean. But anyway, looking back here at the rapid scan imagery of Hurricane Iota. So we saw those very warm eye temperatures earlier in comparison to recent. It's just fizzled away a little bit. It's not to say that it's not still there. The latest indication actually that the warmest eye temperature is minus 55 all of a sudden, but it will fluctuate like that.
Yeah, I mean, despite the eye not being as small in size as some of the recent storms we've been talking about in the Atlantic, the core itself is quite small. When you have these minus 70s trying to wrap all the way around again, they're really just blowing up right on top of where the eye was a bit more visible, at least on infrared recently. I'm sure if you take a look at visible satellite imagery, you'll still see more ragged but well-defined eye feature, still trying to clear out on that in a bit more of a realistic view than the mass fluctuations that infrared give you.
Well, we're about to run out of visible imagery actually. It's just about to turn dark. What's the latest on recon? Are they getting near?
They have just dropped to 700 millibar flight altitude for their penetration of the storm. An alarming thing is that we're seeing winds of 50 knots in a very outer band.
Wow.
Quite a distance from the sensor and well outside the CDO.
Let's see if we can get some more questions. There's been a lot that have come in during our stream so far. Can't keep up with all of them, but let's see if I can just get some here. Is there a chance that Iota could become a category 5? We've at the moment given it 8%, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen right there. I imagine you guys might have your chances a little bit higher than that at this point.
I'm personally in agreement with 8%. I think Thomas is slightly higher, but it's still, before recon gets in, we're assuming it's a category 1 because we're about to get a proper estimate, but we don't have enough evidence to say that it won't do an IO replacement cycle or for some reason stop intensifying. We basically haven't got close enough to give it a higher chance.
About an IO replacement cycle, there's a question there as well. Is there a chance that it goes through one? These are one of the more difficult things to predict in hurricanes.
Yeah, I'd say they're second only to rapid intensification.
I still think, people asking this question, it's a valid question, but I do think people as a whole need to, realize as well that the difference between, 140 miles an hour, which is the current forecast, or if it goes a bit higher than that, in category 5, well, at that point, at least for the exact landfall location, damage differences will be, a bit more substantial. When you're talking about the storm as a whole, we're looking at another potential widespread major flooding event for Central America with those rainfall totals in areas that haven't had time to properly recover from the mass rainfall amounts that just fell from Eta, less than 2 weeks ago. So while, a lot of people question stuff like that because of the Saffir-Simpson scale being mostly wind-weighted, tropical cyclones have 90% of their deaths caused by flooding-related things, whether it be storm surge, rainfall, and other flooding-related issues. So, it's important to note the wind speeds in that regard at least, but it's not really worth speculating on them too much when we know the facts outright about the major flooding risk that this system poses, and that's why you've seen, government officials in I think 4 separate countries right now, Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, already issuing evacuation orders ahead of the system, not because of the wind for many of those locations, but because of the extreme flooding risk that the sustained heavy rainfall totals on top of what's already fallen will bring.
Now, something else for you to ponder over. Will the storm speed up or slow down as it nears Central America? And what is the possibility that it survives the crossover into the Eastern Pacific Basin? On the first question, I think you were looking at that a little bit earlier, Kay.
Yeah, the models have been trending a little bit slower. Not anywhere near stalling, but say a few more hours over water, a few more hours over land. And that just gives it a bit more time to get stronger and a bit more time to produce rainfall, unfortunately.
Now, the chances that it does move into the Eastern Pacific with tropical storm force winds is a non-zero possibility, because the National Hurricane Center has the Pacific coast of El Salvador and Nicaragua there, and I think that's 15 to 20% chance of tropical storm force winds. So there is a small chance that we'll make it over.
If it was a couple hundred miles further south, even just 50 at all these points, it would be higher. But I mean,
this storm has continued to trend south, though, hasn't it?
That's true. That is true. They did say that explicitly in their forecast discussion. If I go to it real quick for the track, that the updated track forecast has been adjusted southward through 24 hours, but little change was required thereafter. So a lot of it's more around initialization than long-term trends, but
the wide shot.
Isn't particularly likely to see that event occur.
It's still moving nearly west, just a tiny northward element. Tiny. I think I can finally show you the latest in the South Indian Ocean. We can't see that much on this imagery, admittedly, but down the bottom left-hand side of the screen is Cyclone Alicia, for those who are concerned about that one. It won't be affecting any land areas, though, but it does have 80-mile-an-hour winds, so that's a certainly a interesting start. I wouldn't say a bold start, but it started the Southwest Indian Ocean cyclone season. 70% of tropical cyclone activity occurs in the Northern Hemisphere. The other 30% starts now as we leave the Northern Hemisphere seasons and the Southern Hemisphere comes into play. But the Atlantic's not playing ball with the calendar by any means. Not to say that we're out of hurricane season, because we're not, but the fact that this storm is already so strong and is likely to become a Category 4, that's just extremely rare to see in November.
Yeah, I think just the thing to note in that regard, at least, is there's been more storms through the first half of the month in the Atlantic in November than there was in October, and even more so than August, and stronger so far this month than either of those months too. So, I mean, while late season activity, can happen, you don't usually see 3 storms in the first 15 days of the month, let alone 2 of them being, major hurricanes the way we've seen as well.
How large is Iota's influence?
Absolutely massive. It's stretching from just offshore of Colombia now, having finally left that region, to about to move onshore in the coastal areas of Nicaragua and Honduras, and going north as far as Jamaica.
Yeah, I actually saw a question about Jamaica earlier, because they did get a lot of rainfall from Eta.
I saw that as well. I was supposed to get onto that.
At least at this point, the storm's further south than Eta was. It's just not taking that southward dive. It's moving more west to west-northwest towards land now. Means that Jamaica's going to get less rain. They still are expecting up to a couple inches, though, or up to 100 millimeters in some areas from the outflow and outer bands that Iota's generating. So enough to be somewhat problematic for places that received a lot of rain from Eta a couple weeks ago. But yet another time that Jamaica's dodging official warnings or watches from tropical cyclones while still getting peripheral impacts that have been more significant than you might expect for an area that hasn't gotten a single watch this year.
So north to south, this storm is nearly 1,000 miles in its influence. And east to west is actually a little bit more, 1,100 miles.
Yeah. Notably, though, the tropical storm force and especially hurricane force wind fields do remain quite small. They should grow somewhat in the next day and a half before landfall. You're talking right now, the largest extent of tropical storm force winds being 110 nautical miles, and the largest hurricane extent being 20 nautical miles as the last full advisory.
The latest recon evidence suggests the tropical storm force wind field might have expanded.
Oh, it wouldn't be surprising at all. I would presume, I haven't seen the full data yet because it's been a bit buggy. There's a big gap on the recon data on some of the
sites. Could you
sites.
tell me what position they were in when they got those 50 knot winds you spoke about earlier?
They were at 15.1 north and 78.6 west.
78.6. Oh, so they were north of the center then.
Northeast.
Northeast even. So looking at this graphic here, this is the satellite imagery obviously, you can see the grid there, the line, the horizontal line above the storm, that's the 15-degree line. So recon were just north of there when they got the 50 knot winds, still some distance away from the central core of the storm.
Someone asked as well.
A lot of banding in this. Frequent areas of 50 knot winds at flight level.
Yeah, someone asked a question as well, and I think Kay, you'll be able to go over this pretty well, and Nathan as well. What are the wind shear dynamics like for Iota right now? I think we were discussing it a little bit earlier.
Wind shear's near nil right now.
You don't get triple outflow with shear influencing the storm significantly.
There was just a question about the eye size as well. It's about 10 miles.
Which isn't as small as Eta, but that is smaller than it was earlier today at some of the recon fixes.
Yeah, of course that is on satellite, and
that is on
probably
satellite.
Slightly larger on recon.
And just looking at more frames, it's interesting to see what's going on right now, because actually what I was expecting to see on the rapid scan imagery as we went along this hour is that those rapidly warming eye would overall continue the trend, but it looks at the moment just as if it's stalled on that, because eye temperature right now, the best I'm getting is a mere minus 58.
What I've been seeing is that very cold minus 85 to minus 90 cloud tops are wrapping round the southern part of the eye, and due to the angle at which the satellite's viewing it, it's covered off the eye from the satellite.
I mean, that is probably it. It's very interesting. Just watch it just for a little while there as it.
I must admit,
this
convective structure with a large wave of minus 85s wrapping around the storm is giving me a little bit of a reminder of how Laura intensified. It just had this wave of very high cloud tops that kept moving round the centre, chasing its tail and trying to link up, and it just about did before it got to land.
It's almost like a callback to Dorian back last year when we were watching that ring of negative 70s running around trying to catch up with each other and link up. I'm not saying it's actually related in any way in terms of intensity. It's just a, I guess, reminder from our past coverage that we've seen stuff like this happen before, in that regard at least.
We got a very impressive half ring of minus 85s to minus 87s. It's not looking very good.
That was just at the beginning of the hour. I mean, the CDO overall is looking significantly more robust than just a little bit ago, and it'll be interesting to see if that CDO manages to wrap all the way around. And I think that this is also it's going to be really interesting to see what Recon finds too.
Yes, so what's the latest timetable on the recon now?
They should be at the eye wall in 15 minutes.
Yep. And just a reference on their position, the latest fix, which was from 6 minutes ago, 14.848 degrees north and 78.93 degrees west. So the fact that they took off a little earlier than their initial schedule means that we're going to get some data a bit earlier than people are assuming earlier today.
14.84 and 78 what?
78.93 degrees west.
So that's 116 miles from the eye.
Probably in 15 to 20 minutes, like Kay said. A question about the timeline as well. When is this thing going to make landfall? As of the 4 p.m. Eastern advisory, which is 21Z, it was looking to be 30 to 33 hours or so from landfall, if I'm not mistaken. So it's coming down a bit now, but still in that range about, right?
Looks like it's going to be evening hours on Monday.
Yeah, just about, because that graphic there you have there, that's just 1 a.m. Eastern just inland, so it's unfortunately going to be another one of those late night landfalls, or one that's much darker outside to begin with. So,
but just to point out again, on the left-hand side, the tropical storm force winds, that's the earliest reasonable arrival time that's depicted there, and they're saying Monday morning that you could start to see the strong winds coming in before you get the main part of the storm.
Yeah. I mean, you still got daylight in Nicaragua and Honduras and a lot of Central America right now, including Guatemala, El Salvador, and Belize. So today is really the best day to prepare, especially if you're in Honduras and Nicaragua ahead of this system. You have a little bit more time if you're further west. But it is possible, but that by the time you wake up tomorrow, that conditions will already start to be deteriorating. So please make sure if you're not ordered to evacuate, that you're taking the proper precautions ahead of time. Just because you don't want to get caught in a situation where you need to do something or think you have to do something, and it's already too unsafe to go outdoors again.
Now, there was a question there, and I was supposed to bring it up earlier, about where the storm ranks on the Cdps scale right now. We've been looking at it fairly closely, and I think Thomas has been looking at that the most.
I currently have it rated at a stage 8 on the Cdps scale, which is quite extensive. It wouldn't require much more in either winds or rainfall in order to get upgraded to a stage 9. Regardless of that, the semantics on whether it is a stage 8 or 9, something to note is that catastrophic damage is likely from the storm, and regardless of the stage, you need to be preparing for this as if it is a worst case scenario, because it very well could be. Current satellite appearance is suggesting it very well could be a worst case scenario over there in just a couple of days. But I mean, with the National Hurricane Center's forecast of 10 to 15 feet of surge, 20 to 30 inches of rain, and winds of 140 miles per hour or greater, you have a combination that is deadly and is going to create just catastrophic and undescribable impacts. So if you're in the path of this storm in Nicaragua or Honduras, you need to be preparing as if this is a worst case scenario. Keep an eye on what local officials are saying. I know some evacuations are taking place. I know that they're already taking preemptive measures for things like dams to try and prevent flooding. We'll see what happens, but it's been a crazy couple weeks, and unfortunately it looks like more catastrophic impacts are coming up.
Sunset over Hurricane Iota at this point, and you can see on this particular imagery, the last visibles, the enormous cloud tops on the southern side of the storm casting a very long shadow as the sun sets there. Yeah. Southeastern side in particular blowing up some very high cloud tops right now.
Yeah, and that's visible really on the infrared imagery too, the cloud top infrared, at least the RGBs. Someone was asking about satellite estimates for intensity. I think those are picking up substantially. Someone's asking, is this really 90 miles an hour?
Yeah.
Yep. I think the best way to put it is that it's probably stronger now than it was at the last advisory because of its satellite appearance improvement. But there just hasn't been hard data, and everyone's really just waiting in anticipation and for the first recon pass, which is really going to happen shortly, because the only better substitute for data for intensity and other information on a tropical cyclone other than recon data is direct land observations. But when a storm's over water, you only have one of those. So we're going to have information in very short order that gives you the best possible data sets on what a storm's actual intensity is. So that's coming out pretty shortly.
Let's just say it will probably be one of the storms that makes the least sense that I've ever seen if they don't find 100-mile-an-hour winds in this right now.
I definitely don't disagree with that. Considering earlier this morning, they were saying 90 miles an hour, recon was getting 80. They said in the discussion that they believe that because of the short flight time, that they might have not sampled the area of highest winds back then, so that's why they kept 90.
I mean, I'm not saying that flippantly.
But,
It's just
I mean,
that
it's improved markedly
else,
since then.
everything else I'm looking at supports at least 100 miles per hour or more.
I mean, Iota looks very impressive to be a Category 1 hurricane. It's just about time to see that rapid intensification phase overnight, and probably tomorrow waking up with the news that Iota, unfortunately, is a major hurricane, which is practically clearly, and well, it's getting more clear with the presentation it has already, and well, unfortunately, it's not going to cease any kind of intensification phase. You can see how very good is looking with the cloud tops everywhere, and the wind shear is practically nil. The sea surface temperatures are extremely warm, over 30 degrees Celsius, which is absolutely impressive during this
Are
time
they?
of date. Well, yeah, between 29 to 30 degrees.
I think it's
I
the
saw.
one below that, so it's about 28 to 29 a range. You might see a tiny splotches a little bit higher, but
It's about, yeah,
regardless,
it's
very
warm.
high and supportive of intensity.
Over
Absolutely,
28 all the way up to landfall.
Yeah, and something to note too, people don't really assume that this thing's, or at base assumption that it hasn't, gone up in intensity very fast because it's only gone from a tropical storm to Category 1. But, pretty important to note that in the last 24 hours, at least from the 21Z update today, the 4 p.m. Eastern one, to the one 24 hours prior, it's gone up in wind speed by 40 miles an hour, or 35 knots or so. So it is intensifying very quickly already, even if, you don't include the fact that it's probably going to be even stronger when we get the new data sets in from the recon pass. So, you know, despite it only changing one category, it's gone up very quickly from its more formative stages where yesterday morning it was struggling a bit more to start to get its act together. We're looking at a very impressive cyclone less than 36 hours after that.
As we continue to watch it on the satellite imagery right now, Kay, it is chasing its tail. Look at very high
Yeah,
cloud tops
absolutely
now
is.
around the eastern side, and they're still pretty high on the northwest. It's more than half covered now, with minus 80s, that is.
Yep.
And again, this shows the extremely high cloud tops, and that is, more likely further south. There's more energy down there in the deeper tropics, and that also means that this storm is capable of producing more rainfall than, say, maybe the mean amount from a hurricane, perhaps. So this could be another devastating blow for Central America, which could receive over 30 inches of rainfall from this storm. We don't even know how much Eta dropped in the end, as far as we know.
Yeah, and the important thing to note, just on those high rainfall totals, is they'd already be devastating enough on their own, but they're coming straight into areas that are still not only very saturated from Eta's massive rainfall totals that we're still waiting to find out the full amount of, but a lot of these areas have had damage, whether it be to infrastructure or other local things that mean that they haven't had the proper time to reestablish and fully recover them, which is why you've seen governments be more proactive, even further out in time ahead of the storm's approach to order evacuations in certain areas that they think are prone. And that's definitely the right thing to do, considering what we're seeing, the potential for localized maximums up towards another meter on top of what's already fallen. And for clarification, those will most likely occur the highest totals in the mountainous range areas along north central Honduras. So, even though you're going to have very heavy rainfall, of course, in totals where the storm comes on shore at its strongest, the highest amounts recorded from this system are more likely than not going to be further inland when the storm's weaker. And that really leads to, I guess, just the public awareness point that, if you're looking at the map for the National Hurricane Center and you see the S over Honduras indicating tropical storm strength, you really shouldn't be discounting the potential damage or threat to life and property that it brings just because of that.
Keep sending in your questions. I know we aren't being able to get through all of them, but we'll eventually get It's a bit of a luck of the draw kind of thing. But there are some that have just come in. Whether we're staying on the air, I think we'll be staying on the air up till the National Hurricane Center's update at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The GFS model shows another system making landfall in Costa Rica after Iota moves inland, and our thoughts on that. We touched on it earlier. Any further comment on that?
I guess just a repeat, really. It's the area of interest that has 20% chance of development in the next 5 days. The GFS is the only significant model that actually develops it right now. But regardless of development, it'll probably bring enhanced rainfall totals to portions of Costa Rica or southern Nicaragua that are going to be pretty saturated after getting the outer impacts from Iota and still getting some impacts recovering from Eta on top of that. So it is something to watch, more for the rainfall than anything else.
And feel free to break in with any news from Recon. I don't know what the schedule is for the updates coming out, but just let me know on that. When do we think that Iota will achieve Category 2 status? I'll be baffled if it's not within an hour. Officially, that is. Why is the eye not clearing out right now?
Because it's
Why do
contracting
you want
and...
the eye clear?
Well,
yes. It's contracting. It's getting smaller, which makes it harder to clear. And it's got these incredibly high cloud tops blocking the satellite. There's a view of it, basically. We're not looking straight down. Not everyone realizes that the satellites aren't directly over the storm. They can have quite a large angle of... I can't remember the word, but they're quite a large angle that means they don't get to see all the way into the bottom of the eye, and in smaller eyes it means you don't get the full eye temperature.
it is, well, actually... Okay, I've just had a thought. Anyway, more comments here. Could this storm's pressure peak in the midnight and 40s?
Go further than that.
Yeah, but,
I believe the latest HWRF with the recon information from this morning was calling for a peak in the 930s.
Wow.
I mean, based on the rapid intensification trend, yeah.
Why do Caribbean systems usually have pinhole eyes, and what does that mean for development and rapid intensification?
Well, they have smaller eyes than systems that you might find over the open Atlantic because the conditions are more favourable and a smaller eye allows for faster intensification. I think it's sort of the favourable environment pushes the storm towards a contracting eye as it intensifies, and that allows it to intensify faster.
Although I wouldn't say it's always. I think we're just in that phase where you've seen, in the past month and a half, 2 of the 3 fastest intensifying storms on record in the basin with Delta and Eta. And of course, those had pinhole eyes, very small cores. So I think, we're more used, I guess, just because of how the later part of the season's developed to see that. But it isn't, an always occurrence by any means. And we've seen storms get very strong, of course, without that too. It's just more often than not, we see them further out in more of the open Atlantic, whether that be, I guess Irma's a good example from 2017 for that. And there's other examples too.
Okay, I was just looking up the satellite positions as well, and at least in terms of longitude, there shouldn't be an issue with looking at this storm at GOES 16 because it's virtually right on top. It would have to be latitude.
Yeah, it's generally latitude that causes the issue.
But even so, I mean, it's quite low latitude. Makes you wonder. I don't have a definitive answer on that one, but just curious. More questions here. Could this develop faster than expected? Well, it started slow, didn't it?
Yeah, people were initially expecting that it would go up very quickly, but much of its first day, it struggled to properly organize. What we've seen since yesterday afternoon is a vast difference in that, though.
At this point, the storm's been developing pretty rapidly, but yeah, I mean, there was some unexpected shear at the start that stopped it from aligning its center and really getting going, but at this point, conditions, as I think we've already mentioned on the stream, are virtually perfect. The only thing stopping this storm from intensifying at a very rapid rate is itself, and right now it's looking like it very well might be.
And there you see the daylight fading now from the visible imagery. It's transitioned to the unenhanced infrared. It's basically what we were showing you just before, but without any color enhancements. So that's the clearest picture of the storm, you could say, in the purest sense. But there we have it. Just to remind people of a schedule right now, Recon are in the storm virtually. We should be getting readings within 10 minutes, Kay?
Just came in.
Okay.
I don't believe we're fully into the sensor. We have an extrapolated pressure in the eye wall of 975, meaning the sensor pressure is probably in the 960s. We have maximum flight level winds of 90 knots, and we have maximum SFMRs of 80 knots.
So we've already exceeded previous recon by about 10 knots.
And
Like,
the
just the
pressure,
findings from the previous
we've
recon.
we've matched the extrapolated pressure from the center of the eye in the eye wall.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm assuming by the top of the hour near it, we're going to have the full eye through, and then we'll see the full pressure and probably the strongest winds in the northeastern quadrant as well, because I don't think they got to this quite yet, if I'm not mistaken.
Kay, do you have a position estimate for that pressure?
13.45 north, 79.60 west.
So that's the northeastern eye wall,
Yes.
and that is 20 miles clear from the eye. From the
Yeah,
center
We
of the
believe
eye.
the radius maximum wind is smaller than that, based off of at least the last reconnaissance. So
Yeah.
probably going to go up still.
Yeah, I mean, the radius of hurricane force winds in that quadrant were only about 24 to 25 miles, at least as of their update about 2 hours ago. So the area of maximum winds, of course, going to be close to the center. So by the top of the hour, K is probably going to have the full actual northeastern quadrant intensity.
And then in an hour's time, unless they feel the need to issue an update statement, the National Hurricane Center will produce their intermediate advisory, at which point they don't update the cone as such. They don't update their forecast, but they do the position update on their cone. So the cone may again misalign if the storm's continuing to go the way that they're not expecting quite as much. The next full cone would be at, what time would it be now? 10 p.m. Eastern time.
Yeah, and just to clarify, because I think some people are taking something out of context, that 90 knots is flight levels. That's not the surface winds, at least at that part of the eye wall. Although, based on how far out that is from the center, I wouldn't be surprised to see a storm of at least that strength. But for context, that part of the storm doesn't have, surface sustained winds of 90 knots.
No, this is several thousand feet up, as far as I can gather.
Yeah, but like Kay said, that's 20 miles out from the center, so you're really starting to enter the higher winds. So it wouldn't be surprising at all to see at least 90 knot surface winds by the time they get, all the way through the northeastern eye wall and break into the eye, especially based on the pressures we're seeing right now too. But just for context,
Yeah.
that particular reading isn't the surface winds there.
If there was any doubt about the forecast, the latest HWRF is coming out right now with recon data from 17 UTC, and it's initialized properly, and it drops from 974 to 939 in 24 hours.
Ooh.
That's 35 millibars. Definitely a category 4, and still with at least 6 hours of strengthening before it reaches land.
Some people are getting a bit carried away. When do we think Iota will be a major hurricane? Well, that's not so bad. We expect, it looks like that's going to happen soon. But another question, what do we think Kappa will become? First of all, it doesn't exist yet. And that could be anything next week in the Atlantic if it becomes anything.
Yeah, I think the best thing to do, and always in situations like this, is focus on the active storms in the world, and especially the ones that are threatening land. So, while computer models give the National Hurricane Center has 20% in the next 5 days for a tropical depression to form, we obviously have a much more pressing matter at hand that really should have most of the attention rather than is the Atlantic going to rake in another name on its record-breaking season in the next couple days.
I've just seen a little bit of reverse psychology there. This will not be a Category 5 because this is 2020, apparently, from one commenter.
I think they're meaning that we've had 4 storms if you include Teddy, try to get there, and none of them have
all
managed
failed.
it. So obviously the 5th one won't do it if 4 before have failed.
Well, let's hope
Which
so.
isn't how storms work, unfortunately. We've had some microwave imagery from around an hour and a half ago come through.
Okay.
It shows a very strong eye wall with no signs of a secondary eye wall forming. Very impressive banding features, however.
Oh, I see this. We've got this image now. Let's just get this on our screen. So there is that microwave imagery. Do you just want to explain it visually for us now that we can see it?
The very thick red band to the northeast through to the southwest indicates that the eye wall is about that time is when the leading edge of that is where we saw it chasing itself on the top, on the satellite tops.
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite likely that that ring extends further round by this point, if not fully connected. Outside of that, there's no obvious secondary wind maxima or significant outer eye wall evident. There's very impressive banding features, extending a notable distance from the storm, and that might be why there's a hurricane watch for San Andres, because that big band to the south of the storm could well have hurricane force gusts at least, and that is about the same latitude as San Andres is.
Yes. No, it actually is. You just about saw the island there. You can see the islands on this graphic as well, the small blue outlines there on the left-hand side of the storm's eye. And as it stands right now, this thing is still moving pretty much west, and that's a beeline for the island of Providencia. San Andres further south there, a slightly longer island. Just looking at latest satellite imagery, it looks like those cloud tops are dropping off a little bit, but the spread of them is still quite something to behold. There's still a few -80s there, but they are becoming a bit more sparse.
Yeah, I think probably the most important thing structurally, at least that we're watching right now, is whether or not that -70 ring, which is having that little gap or weaker section rotate around, when or if that's going to fully close off, because that fragmentation's at the start of the stream was on the southeastern quadrant. It's rotated around up towards the northern side, and it's really trying to chase itself off. But the question of if or when that happens is going to be one of the important questions that we'll see answered eventually alongside those cloud tops.
Something slightly concerning I'm noting in the
Okay.
satellite imagery is that despite the fact the eye cleared into temperatures below -20, the influence of this extreme convective burst in the eye wall that's been wrapping round has almost completely covered off the eye with
Yep.
high-level cirrus. And given that Recon is suggesting this is a Category 2 hurricane, if not a high-end Category 2, based on a smaller eye potentially, the eye should be powerful enough to stop itself going into the -70s, but it's about to get there. And to see such strong convection overpowering the eye, it seems like the eye may be significantly smaller than we thought it was.
Yeah, I mean, we went just in this hour from an eye, I think at around -17 to, I think, we're in the -60s now for that eye too, right?
-67.
So, a very quick change in pace.
But
for
I
that,
think
but
the best way to coin it would be apparent eye temperature.
Yes,
Yes, that would
this
have
is
to be.
high-level cloud that's covering over the eye. It's still just as warm underneath it.
Yeah, it's really important to explain, especially because a lot of people, when we don't have full recon data, use satellite imagery for estimates. When you have a situation like this and the eye cools off 50 degrees in 1 hour because the eye wall cloud tops are firing up, that doesn't necessarily mean the storm's weakened by any means. It's just a stage in its development, and you have to watch, longer term trends after that to really ascertain things. I mean, fortunately, at least we don't just have to use satellite imagery because we have that recon data about to come in, and it already is coming in.
Now, there was another question about the CDPS there, and I'm not sure who's on top of the calculations right now. I think it might be Thomas, not sure. But they were wondering if this storm becomes a major hurricane, whether the stage number will rise?
So the stage number is based on the forecasted intensity of the storm from this point. So indirectly, if it became a major hurricane now, that could increase the rating because that means it could be stronger later. As of now, a stage 8 has been given for this storm, but that's based on the forecasted landfall of 140 miles an hour or 120 knots. So regardless of current intensity now, that won't affect too much what the CDPS rating will be later. The only thing it could really do is change the overall intensity forecast. But as of now, even if this became a major, like right now, we'd probably be looking at a stage 8 still.
Recon data is in.
Okay.
The minimum extrapolated pressure in the eye is 962.8 millibars.
Wow.
We had the peak northeast eye wall in the previous update. Winds dropped off from there. In the southwest eye wall, which is supposed to be weaker, we're seeing the same readings. 89 knot flight level, in fact 82 knot SFMR.
Whoa.
Which would support the conclusion that the northwest eye wall is strongest at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, like satellite appearance would show that that northeastern quadrant might be weaker because that's where that convection is trying to trail right now. Another interesting observation I found in the most recent satellite frames, it seems like we have a few hot towers right around the eye, like 3 of them. And that's quite concerning. And, I thought that this eye was going to be bigger than it looks like it is, but the fact that we have hot towers forming extremely close to the eye, I mean, how big must that eye be? It has to have contracted significantly to see hot towers firing within that pool of -60s that we were seeing.
Right there, you can see the grey shades at the southern rim of the eye there. That's the hot towers. Do you just want to explain what exactly they are and what they mean as well?
Yeah, so what they are, they're basically bursts of thunderstorms, and they indicate that a storm is intensifying. When you have hot towers like this, or basically new thunderstorms, new convection firing around the center of a hurricane like this, that means that the storm is intensifying. And when you have 3 forming right around the center, in this case, that's kind of an alarming sign for the future of the storm for places like Nicaragua and Honduras, and I think that it could show even a significant difference between this recon pass and the next recon pass at this rate.
Now, I've got just a little vector on the motion in the last hour. This storm has moved just north of west, about 17 miles this hour. It's moved north, so let's just get this right. It's moved west 17 miles and north 1 mile, to put that into a kind of direction there. So it's very nearly west still at this point. And if it kept going in that direction, extrapolating out, it would pass very close to Providencia within 20 miles. And if it was to extrapolate all the way to Central America, we'd be looking at landfall. Let's see. You know what? You'd be looking at landfall about 10 miles south of where Eta did.
Wow. That's terrifying. That's a terrifying prospect. Something that I just wanted to note, the extrapolated pressure on this current flight got down to around 962. What was the extrapolated pressure on the previous flight? Like 975? So this has fallen.
It would support around 10 millibars in 6 hours.
10 millibar drop in 6 hours, that's really concerning. If it continued that, you see a 20 millibar drop in 12 hours, a 40 millibar drop in 24. I mean, you're looking at a storm in the 920s knocking on the doorstep of Nicaragua and Honduras.
I think it's important to note that would assume that the current rate that we've seen in the past couple hours continues nonstop, which isn't certain by any means. But
of course,
I think probably one of the most interesting things is that despite the pressure drop, we're in the low to mid 960s now, most likely by any means. that, the winds are still taking time to catch up to that. Stronger recon than earlier, but the most you can really get out of what we've seen so far, at least, would be, around 85 knots or so, if you want to be a little generous and say they haven't, sampled everything yet. That doesn't mean, of course, that the storm isn't going to continue to intensify very quickly as it has been, but I do think that probably surprises some people that were initially expecting higher numbers. But, I mean, that's the fortunate thing about having reconnaissance, is that we can get the full data sets. But that pressure drop especially is very concerning for when winds try to pick up and catch up to that a bit more.
We'll see what happens there. I'm very curious as to what their pass that shows the southeast and northwest quadrants will show. Because I have a feeling in particular, at least on satellite, you would think that that southeastern quadrant's probably going to be the strongest one right now. So, I mean, we'll see, but I'm not sure if we have sampled the strongest part of the storm yet. So I'm cautiously optimistic that the winds aren't as high as we thought, but we'll see.
Even so, the rain's obviously going to be the largest widespread threat to this. So, while a lot of people pay attention to the wind, and rightfully so, especially with smaller storms, the major impacts for that are going to be right, in the vicinity of where the storm makes landfall, begins moving onshore, and then the storm surge, particularly on the northern half of that. Regardless of any exact intensity that this thing holds in 30 hours or so from now, when it, gets close to landfall and is making landfall, it's obviously going to be a massive regional threat regardless.
We have the center drops on, pressure at 964. Which is down exactly 10 from the fix that I believe it was 18 UTC.
That's got to be a category 2
5
pressure.
hours ago. That's 2 millibars per hour for 5 hours.
And on the screen right now, water vapor imagery, the rapid scan. You get a better idea of the... It sometimes shows the structure a little bit better here, both inside and on the edges of the storm. As you can see, a very moist environment. Otherwise, you'd be seeing some yellows on the image, but there's none of that to speak of. So dry air is never an issue for Iota.
Not anymore, it seems. If you were to take a wider shot, you'd see around it, away from its general area it's in right now, there's a lot of dry air in the basin as a whole, but it's in a pocket where it's in a very moist environment combined with low wind shear, and that's why we've seen the intensification.
This outflow is going to clearly help with that, though.
Absolutely. As this moves forward, it's not like dry air is all of a sudden going to become a major issue, in the next day or so. Even though air is drier as it moves further west, the outflow is going to push westward with the system, and just the satellite imagery shows that on its own.
There it is.
Yeah, and just looking at the imagery, kind of proves the point too as well that, based on the timing of the system's approach, that and the expected arrival of some tropical storm force winds, that the time for repair is really going to end as you head into tomorrow morning. So tonight's the best time to take preparations if you need to finish them and haven't really done everything yet. You don't really want to be caught in a situation where you're doing something either really late at night where it's not safe because conditions are starting to deteriorate, or get caught in a situation tomorrow when conditions are deteriorating or already very bad, and you think you need something or have to do something, and then you're putting yourself in an unsafe situation. So just make sure that any preparations are rushed to completion in the evening hours today, before conditions start to deteriorate more as those outer bands start to lap on shore.
Now, I've just lost my rapid scan imagery on my other screen.
Oh dear.
So we'll try and get that back in a minute, but you can still see it here.
Yes. There are two things I'd like to note. The first thing is that while the storm over the last 5 hours has dropped an average of 2 millibars per hour, which is definitely rapid intensification, as a storm gets into the 950s and becomes a major hurricane, it's generally observed that unless it undergoes structural changes, the rate of intensification increases. We saw with Wilma, for example, which is the definition of rapid intensification, that got to 946, and then dropped 50 millibars in 6 hours, having only dropped about 25 in the previous period. of 12 hours or so,
Hmm.
I believe it was. So we could see this storm ramp up further still.
It's not a good thought. Just to point
No.
out on the infrared imagery here, you can also see the western shelf of the band, enormous band, that is about to reach the island of Providencia within the next probably hour. A lot of the higher clouds are going to be coming in.
And I've received an image from a Honduran resident in our Discord server of a river valley that is still flooded today from
wow.
Eta.
That really goes to one of the
Able to
big
get that on
concerns with
stream.
that really goes to one of the big concerns with Iota, is that a lot of these areas are still either extremely saturated, flooded, or haven't had proper times to recover, whether that be, people regathering their bearings, or, actual chances for infrastructure to be repaired ahead of the approach of the system. So that really raises the threat for exasperation in terms of the damages that could potentially occur, just because a lot of this, from the strongest winds to storm surge, and most importantly for the region, rainfall, is going to be occurring in the same areas that were completely drenched and are still, as that picture shows, flooded in some cases fully from Eta's impacts just 2 weeks ago.
That's pretty dreadful. So that's in
Yeah.
Honduras, right?
Yes. And I believe it was taken today or yesterday.
Yeah, and it's important to note the location too, because even though right now Iota's forecast to make landfall in Nicaragua, the highest rainfall total forecast right now for the storm, not just from the NHC, but also if you're looking at more regional-based computer models that are zoomed in on the region, are Honduras, particularly in the mountainous areas where you could see upwards of 700 plus millimeters of rainfall, etching up towards a meter in isolated areas at peaks too. So, really goes to serve that this isn't just a threat where it makes landfall with its strongest winds in the immediate vicinities there, but it is a major threat for the entire region, Central America, stretching from Nicaragua to Honduras to Belize, Guatemala, El Salvador, even parts of Mexico, and then areas where it isn't necessarily heading towards, like Costa Rica and Panama as well, where some rainfall is also a threat.
You're now looking at a wide shot of the Atlantic. If you've just joined us, this is our latest discussion on Hurricane Iota, which appears to be strengthening at this point. Officially, though, still only, in inverted commas, at 90 miles per hour. Pressure of 974 was their last advisory at 4 p.m. Eastern Time from the National Hurricane Center, but Recon have found supporting evidence for 964 millibars. So, Kay, I imagine that means it's a Category 2. It sounds like it.
I would be amazed if the pressure's gone down 10 millibars and the winds haven't gone up enough to make it to Category 2. I believe the winds are hiding in the northwest quadrant, but the plane will probably follow the same pattern as the last few missions, where it turns east, goes south of the center, and then comes in from the southeast to the northwest and then goes home. We should see how much the pressure's falling right now. We'll get an hour's ratio, and we've seen from previous fixes that this storm loves to change the rate at which it's intensifying short term, but over longer term, between the 6 hourly fixes, you get a much better picture.
To reiterate the watches and warnings right now, a hurricane warning is in effect for Providencia, which will be the first place affected by this storm shortly. The coast of Nicaragua from the border with Honduras to Sandy Bay Serpi, and the coast of Honduras also from the border to Punta Patuca. Hurricane watch for San Andres, along with a tropical storm warning, and that tropical storm warning also in place for the coast of Nicaragua from south of Sandy Bay Serpi to Bluefields, and the northern coast of Honduras from west of Punta Patuca to Punta Castilla. There are no tropical storm watches anywhere beyond that, at least not yet, but, well, it's going to be another massive rainfall issue. And you know something, as we look on this imagery here, and I don't know whether it's true or not, but you've got part visible there, and I think you can even see on the visible satellite there are tiny puddles inland in the continent there. You can often see flooding from satellite. I'm not making this up, but it.
Yeah, no, I don't think you're wrong. You can see a little bit of indication. I think probably the best one that we remember, at least in that regard, to show the severity of inland flooding would probably be Cyclone Eta. I think that was clear, very, pretty recently.
Last year.
The before after for that was, exemplary. You could see the damage that was done, unfortunately, but I don't think you're wrong either, and that really just goes to affirm what we've seen from some of the on-the-ground photos, that a lot of the saturation and flooding left over from a system that left the area about a week ago is still there right now.
Let's take some questions. You can send them in during our stream tonight. Start your message with Force13 all in text on our YouTube chat. What are our updated percentages for Category 5? We haven't updated them yet. And I don't feel a need to at this... I don't feel a pressing need to this hour. Doesn't it look like a bit of dry air is coming around the inner core a bit?
I don't see it myself personally.
Me neither.
Not particularly. I mean, if they're talking about the little area that's been not minus 70s like the rest, that's more of a structural thing where it's trying to close off a full ring of minus 70 degrees Celsius around the eye. That isn't really dry air hopping inside the system by any means. Although 6 to 12 hours ago, when there was a bit more of a disheveled appearance, it was apparent that there was potentially some interference then.
It looks like Iota is ramping up the convection around the eye even more so. Could it get to Category 4 in 12 hours, is another question we've received.
It's not impossible if the pressure drops and wind catches up, but I think Kay will concur at least a little bit with the fact that it's up 40 miles an hour about in the past 24 hours. So, you take that, it'd probably be a little bit longer than 12 hours for it to get if you take a similar rate of intensification.
Get to Category 4, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So 30 miles an hour about if you're assuming it's 100 miles an hour right now, but if you're going from baseline, then it's 40.
That would be 15 knots. You could do that in 6 hours at this rate. The winds catch up.
No, it would be, I think, 20 to 25 knots.
Oh, wait, no. Sorry, I was just decided it was a Category 3 for a couple of seconds. Yeah, it would be longer than 6 hours, in all likelihood. Unless it decides to properly explode.
I am finding it interesting that a couple of 18Z models, admittedly ones that have seen better track records, the GFS and the NAM, and also the Icon, don't call for much more strengthening. Icon actually calls for the most, strengthening by maybe another degree of what it's just done in the last 6 hours. It's still a case that they're not really properly picking up on this storm, are they?
No.
Even take a situation, say, oh, this only for some reason goes down to the 950s and doesn't continue on the expected forecasts and go down significantly further in intensification. Just having the winds catch up to where it is right now would probably have it, reaching into major hurricane strength. Get 10 millibars further down, you're closer to the higher end Category 3, maybe trying to bust into Category 4. Once the winds catch up to the pressure, that is. So I don't really know if that's the best reading, at least on those models. Are they initiating the pressure correct right now, at least from 18Z?
The HWRF did.
What I can say, though, is that all of these models are set on this being an enormous rainmaker. Mainly, actually, they're talking more the northern half of Honduras, northeastern Nicaragua around the border, and into Guatemala, northern half of Guatemala. All those areas could see 20 inches of rain or higher.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier in the stream too, but there's evacuations in Guatemala too, not just Honduras and Nicaragua ahead of this system, and there'll probably be some in El Salvador as well, and probably potentially in Belize too. Even when this system is no longer a hurricane, it's a tropical storm or depression, those are going to be the times where the areas that are going to be getting their peak rainfall totals are going to end up getting, their worst rainfall amount. So despite the rapid weakening in wind, when this thing goes inland more, it's not going to be any less of a potential threat, especially for those areas in north central Honduras, which are potentially expecting localized maximums up towards a meter if they get unlucky and some of the more zoomed in models are correct on the rainfall assumption. Even so, you're talking widespread 500 to 700 millimeters across a significant land area that is very saturated and hasn't had time to properly recover from the major impacts that Eta brought just about 2 weeks ago. So, I mean, there's not enough time to really reiterate the threat level that this ends up bringing because of that.
Okay, any more news on Recon?
The vortex data message has come through, and
Okay.
they are reporting a closed circular eye that has contracted by 20%, now down to 16 nautical miles compared to 5 hours ago.
That's fascinating.
Certainly confirms the earlier assumptions that there was some contraction ongoing. It's going to be
It's not a
interesting to see.
pinhole, but it's definitely smaller, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's still shrinking a bit. Something else which I've seen is that they dropped a drop zond in the southwest eye wall. It went round to the southeast eye wall, which is going to be should be the weakest quadrant given the direction of movement. And that found 76 knot surface winds, but it found major hurricane force winds just above that, which means that this wind lag is pretty apparent in that the surface winds haven't caught up, but just slightly higher off the ground, the winds are getting there.
Yeah, I mean, look at the pressure right now and the rate of change. It probably isn't too long, and National Hurricane Center perfectly agrees with this before this ends up becoming a major hurricane. They're saying that by 6Z, which is about 4.5 hours from now, that this will likely be a major hurricane at that point in time. So they are expecting the wind to start matching up with the pressure that we're seeing much more in the near future, despite some of their earlier surprise that it wasn't. And just to clarify, it isn't a major hurricane at this point in time. Those aren't surface winds, but I know a lot of people take some of that stuff out of context. Chat messages, got to clear it up. That isn't the surface winds, and it's
No,
definitely not.
I'm just laughing because it's the best looking Category 1 anyone's ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about storms in the past couple of years that have managed to become a hurricane despite looking disgusting, I think Barry's the best example.
Oh dear.
This one takes the cake for a really good-looking hurricane that, for some reason, isn't past Category 1 yet. Although, like Case said, it wouldn't be surprising to see, based on the pressure, a reading in the northwestern eye wall potentially a bit stronger to lift it up to 85 knots. That bring it to Category 2 strength. But,
Yeah.
like you said yourself, Nathan, the fact of the matter is, despite the exact intensity of the system when it comes on shore, it's still going to be a major threat because of the rainfall that it's going to bring.
Yeah, it really doesn't matter how strong or not strong it gets. It's pretty guaranteed that it's going to drop over 20 inches of rain and 30 in some places.
Yeah.
As long as people realize that, because I know a lot of media coverage focuses a lot on the wind speeds rather than a lot of the other factors, despite the fact that 90% of deaths from cyclones are from flooding issues. As long as people really get the message that despite not only its strength coming on shore, whatever that ends up being, or inland when it's weakening much faster, your main threat that you're looking at here is prolonged major rainfall impacts. And, National Hurricane Center kind of picks that discrepancy between wind and expected total impacts well, because they have it as a tropical storm when it's moving inland over into Honduras and weakening to a tropical depression. But at all of those points, it's going to be dropping extreme rainfall amounts. That's I think that's 1 a.m. on Wednesday about. That's indicative of a point where you're going to be seeing potentially a couple inches an hour of rain in parts of Honduras north of the center there, projected center at least. And that's where you're seeing the rainfall totals get really pumped up, because this system's still going to draw in rain and moisture from the Caribbean Sea even after it's inland and weakening, and it's going to be a major threat to life well after it moves inland.
Now I'm hearing Recon are going for the southeast eye wall?
Yes. Something that I would like to show to the audience from Recon is the graph of flight level winds and surface winds as they went through the eye. It's very impressive.
Here we go. So we've got it loaded, Kay. Go ahead.
What you can see is that there's reasonably high winds in the outer regions. The flight level winds are spiking as you go through those outer bands. And then just after the 22-28Z line, the winds start going up as you go into the eye wall, and there's very little disruption to the line as it climbs.
Mm-hmm.
And then you hit the peak eye wall, and it immediately drops in a straight line all the way down into the center with zero interference, and straight back up on the other side.
That's
and then
quite
goes
amazing.
down even cleaner than it came up.
So what does that tell us, Kay?
It indicates that the eye has some pretty powerful. It shows that the eye is strong, and beneath the upper level clouds, this thing is a beast. And once the eye clears, it's going to be very, very impressive. And it's definitely not done yet.
That's not the news we wanted to hear, but unfortunately it is the news that we have. If you have any more questions for us during this hour of coverage, we're here till the end of the hour when the National Hurricane Center put out an intermediate advisory, unless for some reason they feel an urgent need to put out an update statement. Chance is pretty slim for that now. We'll let you know what they say. We had a question before, based on outflow alone, is this the best looking storm since Gilbert? That would be quite a claim.
I wouldn't say it's best looking yet because its eye hasn't cleared, but it might look quite impressive once it gets that circular eye on satellite imagery. While we're on the topic of satellite imagery, I would like to note that we've seen a renewed burst of -90s in the southwest eye wall, accompanied by lightning, which is
Southwest,
the last thing you want to see.
That came from the hot towers we were discussing last hour.
Yes.
Yep. And you can see in particular on the rapid scanner on the screen right now that it's that really dark gray or light gray coming up right on the southern part of the eye wall there. The expansiveness of those -80s from earlier has dissipated quite significantly, but you have a new, stronger set of much colder cloud tops coming in right now, and I'm not sure if that imagery on the rapid scan is slightly dated because there's a new frame from a more wide shot that's from 2315Z, so that's 12 minutes old, that shows a much wider expanse of -70s and -80s, where on that rapid scan you see that little smaller burst of -80s trying to reach into -90s there.
There are imagery
significant burst of
problems
lightning in there.
everywhere today, so that could be the case.
Yeah. It's just, lightning is the last thing you want to see in a tropical cyclone, especially one that's gotten to this intensity, because it means that basically means the convection is, the air in the eye wall is rising so fast due to the convection, I should say, that it's producing lightning, and that means that it's intensifying quickly.
Yeah, I just posted the image, the latest Go 16 frame from 12 minutes old, but
yeah, we've got
I mean,
stuff that's half an hour old here, so
yeah, so
this
that one's a
is
bit more up to date.
losing it a bit.
Don't know if you
Dave,
can pull it up.
The GOES East Mesosector, both of them are now on Florida. Neither of them are on the hurricane anymore, so that's
What?
why it's no longer updating.
There's a
Oh, that's
SpaceX launch,
upsetting.
apparently.
Oh.
They've moved for SpaceX.
Well, one
does
or the other,
happen.
I guess.
We don't have rapid scan right now.
That's a bit frustrating considering the situation that's unfolding right here.
Yeah.
But yeah, at least we have some satellite imagery that's high resolution with GOES. Just not up to date every second, really, or every minute telling us what's going on. But that's the latest frame, at least. This new burst of -80s, much colder, tighter around the center. But the old -80 degree set's dying off a bit.
So whilst we try and source some new imagery pretty soon, let's go back to the the floater imagery, which isn't quite as up to date, but it does give you a wide shot and a full picture in what's been occurring in the last few hours, and gives you a very good idea of the trend, the way this storm is going. Whilst I get some more satellite imagery up that will help us a little bit better here, Strat, go ahead.
I was just going to say, someone asked a question. I think this is good to clear too. Someone asked, "Is this going to impact Belize?" And the answer to that, despite it expected right now to make landfall in northern Nicaragua and then dissipate in either southwestern Honduras or El Salvador, yes, you're going to see substantial impacts in Belize from this. Particularly in the southern part of the country, they're expecting
Yep.
up to 8 to 16 inches of rainfall. Some areas locally could be getting a bit higher than that.
Yep.
But most of the country is expecting at least 4 inches of rain. So even though the actual center is going to be pretty displaced from Belize as a whole, and you're expecting the storm to actually dissipate before the whatever circulation's left actually reaches even the longitude of Belize, you're still going to see significant rainfall and impacts, particularly in the southern portions of the country. And if you are there, make sure you're staying up to date with generally the latest information about your exact location, because some of those totals might vary a bit. But if you're in a particularly prone area, it wouldn't be surprising to see some extra information or potentially evacuation orders given out, because if you go just southwest of the border of Belize and Guatemala, then you start to see splotches of 16 to 24 inches of rainfall possible. Those are a bit more mountainous areas, but some of those can trickle down back in a bit, and you always have to be concerned and prepared.
Now, ironically, the imagery we have here, this wide shot, is actually the most recent that we can get. So I'm just going to see if we can possibly zoom in more on the storm right now. You'll have to pardon my disorganization here as we bring the storm in. Can we get a zoom on that? So there we are right now. That's a fair view, I suppose. Not the higher resolution that we had last hour, but you can still see its progress, and quite clearly still moving pretty much due west.
They are expecting it to gain some latitude, but this fits the overall narrative that the track forecast is going to be more solidly potentially for landfall in far northern Nicaragua compared to the initial forecast, which are saying more extreme eastern Honduras instead.
Right now, those high cloud tops completely engulfing the center of the storm, but they're wrapping round very, very quickly actually, and it shows, even without being able to see it, it shows where the eye position is.
Very, very impressive burst.
It's extremely impressive. I mean, we were talking about this, trying to play catch up and get that full ring of minus 70s. It definitely has the full ring of minus 70s. And I think that the more impressive thing is that Recon's made it clear we have a well-established eye in here that shouldn't be getting overpowered by this kind of convection. And right now, not only is it getting overpowered, it's getting massively overpowered. It looks like minus 80s are starting to bleed in from a burst into that eye. So
yeah,
it's very, very powerful.
That's pretty crazy. More questions. Charles asks, does it look like concentric eye walls?
It seems like the opposite. Despite all this
Yeah.
very impressive banding, there is a very strong eye wall and no sign of a second eye wall.
Any chance mid-level shear comes in at the last minute to disrupt Iota like what happened with Delta?
We're not seeing anything coming.
The differences, especially between the two, not just positioning, but Iota's core, and particularly the eye, is a bit larger. So, it takes a bit more for Shear to actually wither away at a system than a very small system like Delta was. The other thing is that, Shear is expected to increase marginally in the last 12 hours before Iota makes landfall, but it's not going to go from right now where it is between 5 and 10 knots at most to, 30 knots. It's going to go maybe up towards 15 at most. What happened with Delta is you went from no shear to 25 knots in just a couple hours, which wasn't anticipated, and that's why it really got destroyed, fortunately, ahead of its landfall in the Yucatan Peninsula. But you're not seeing a similar situation in any regard with Iota unless something also quite unexpected occurs in that regard.
So how long is it until landfall now at this point? 30 hours roughly?
In between 30 and 33 hours, yeah. Although, as we've seen with some of these systems coming on shore, their landfall times a bit tricky to nail down because they've had some last-second variation. We saw that with Delta, Zeta, and Eta with their Central American or Yucatan Peninsula landfall. So, even though that's the forecast right now, people in the area should be, aware of the fact that that can vary still by several hours, and for some reason you might see something a couple hours later, but you could also see something a couple hours earlier, and that really goes to serve the point that any preparations should really be done tonight and through the rest of this evening. So you can already see some of the cloud cover, potentially outer bands with rainfall, starting to come on shore in far eastern Nicaragua and Honduras. And that really tells you that by the time you wake up tomorrow, the time to prepare, especially with the expected arrival time for tropical storm force winds, will be over at that point in time. So please make sure if you're watching this and are in those areas that you're taking every possible precaution tonight. If you're further west in Nicaragua or Honduras, you have maybe a little bit extra time to prepare, but by the time you wake up tomorrow, it could also become far less safe at that point. So generally for the region, all your preparations should be rushed to completion in the next several hours.
Latest image showing that maybe the center is starting to deepen again with those cloud tops. Gee, it's quite a sight. And it's completely thrown me from what else I was going to say. It's been that kind of season. It's going to be ridiculous to look back on this with Beta, Zeta, Eta, Iota. It'll just be impossible to remember all of these storms.
Well, it'll all be inside an animation to remember them all, I guess.
The National Hurricane Center will update in around 25 minutes or less. They often do it early. I'm not sure whether they will do that with recon in the storm. Okay, they just have, and they've given it 100 mile per hour winds and a pressure of 964 millibars. This is breaking news that Iota has strengthened to a Category 2 hurricane and is expected to bring potentially catastrophic winds, life-threatening storm surge and extreme rainfall impacts to Central America. So they've given it 100 miles per hour, the pressure 964 moving west, or 280 degrees at 9 miles per hour, position 13.3 north, 79.8 degrees west. Thoughts from our team right now?
It's a reasonable estimate given the data we've had.
Yep, they're probably going with the fact that there's probably a bit stronger winds in the northwestern eye wall, and those will be enough to get up to 85 knots. That's your 100 mile an hour Category 2 hurricane right there.
But with its appearance and a pressure of 964, my goodness. It's still quite baffling that it's not stronger than that.
Right, yeah. I'm just having a look on I'm just reading through the advisory now. Sorry about that. I've been trying to speak for the past 5 minutes, but nothing's... Oh dear, my microphone's not listening.
Well, we've got you now, Christian. Go ahead.
I'm just reading this. Iota strengthens to a Category 2 okay, you've already read through it.
I'm sorry about that. There haven't been any changes to the warnings either. It is intermediate advisory. I don't expect that much has changed. That they'll do a big update probably at 10 p.m. Eastern time.
Yep, location 13.3 north, 79.8 west.
Yep. They are saying right now, at least in the discussion outlook from the intermediate advisory, that the core will pass near or over Providencia Island late tonight. So they are expecting a potential landfall or very close approach to landfall at that particular location. So, I mean, we've been talking a lot about the coast, but we could see potentially, if it threads the needle exactly, a bit of an earlier landfall. Although,
we shouldn't have even been
really
talking about a landfall in the first place, but it's trending that way now.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen a lot of these systems that have formed later in the season have, substantial southward tracks or southward track deviations. Delta and Zeta were probably the biggest examples because they were initially expected to make landfall either in Cuba or get very close to the western coast of Cuba, and their tracks just brought them into the Yucatan Peninsula instead. Eta was a bit less, but it had southward shifts as well, particularly for its landfall location. And we've seen Iota as well, initially expected to make landfall in far eastern Honduras, now looking more towards the more northern portions of Nicaragua. Particularly Iota, that's in the cone of uncertainty during those first advisories, but we've seen multiple storms late in the year in the Caribbean have these southward track adjustments after they form. And unfortunately, right now, at least, it's going to bring landfall potentially pretty close to where Eta made landfall. And then, of course, after that, you're going to see the worst rainfall impacts coming over relatively similar geographic regions as well through Nicaragua, Honduras, and stretching into El Salvador, Guatemala, and Belize too.
So if you've just joined us, the confirmation that Iota is now a Category 2 storm with winds of 100 miles per hour sustained, and an estimated central pressure 964, which Recon got pretty much square on there inside the eye. Any more updates, Kay, on that?
They're about to turn in from the southeast and make a pass through. Looks like they'll be hitting the eye at or just after the top of the hour.
And still some people expressing surprise that this has only just reached Category 2 status with its appearance, as we said, at the top of the first hour of our coverage. We've seen Category 4s look worse, although the eye has clouded over a bit. You can't say that anymore.
Well, Delta looks worse.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I think to be fair though, a lot of the times where you see a storm look worse and have higher winds is when they're coming down from their higher peaks, And I guess the most unusual thing I guess you could say in terms of Iota here is the, wind to pressure. 964 millibars and only barely 85 knots, which is 100 miles an hour. A lot of times we see storms with a much larger pressure to wind speed discrepancy when they're weakening, particularly when they're at a higher latitude, and in the later stages of the life, oftentimes undergoing some baroclinic influences. But in this case, at least, it's more of just a case of the wind speeds having to end up catching up to the pressure. Although, notably and explicitly in the forecast discussion, the National Hurricane Center has at times been surprised with the winds not catching up as quickly as you would expect otherwise.
I'd also like to note that Recon, at least, I think that we generally agree, it hasn't examined the strongest part of the storm yet, so we don't actually know. It could potentially be a little stronger than this, but regardless, the winds definitely have some catching up to do, but the fact we're seeing pressure fall at a rate it is very concerning.
Yeah, and it isn't like, you had a situation where the pressure reading at the 4 p.m. advisory of 974, I think it was, from a recon pass that was 3 hours before that advisory, and they were just using it for continuity. That was about 30 minutes to an hour before their pass. So you are really seeing a 10 millibar drop in pressure in about 3.5 to 4 hours. So you are seeing very substantial intensification in this situation, not just in wind speeds, which are up now, I think about 40 or 45 miles an hour in the past day, but also the pressure is dropping very substantially.
And that is likely to continue at this point. Pressure 964 dropping from 974 within the span of, how long was it? 6 hours?
974 to 964.
5 hours.
I think.
Yes.
2 millibars per hour.
What are we? We're at the last recon pass through the center came before at least this plane at around 1930 UTC. So you're talking, I think it's about 4.5 hours or so, at most. I think it's maybe 4. So regardless, very quick intensification by the forecast discussion and official forecasts really expect to continue. The 18Z point on Monday, which is 1 p.m. Eastern, is expected to have 140 mile an hour sustained winds. So if the pressure keeps dropping at a pretty quick clip and winds catch up a bit more, that's definitely possible to see winds go up another 40 miles an hour or 30 knots or so in the next 18 hours about.
Now, the National Hurricane Center, from their last forecast, essentially expect that it will be a major hurricane in 6 hours. If I'm reading that right. Yeah, in 6 hours.
9 hours.
By
6 hours from now.
By 6C, I think.
Have they done that thing where they say it's 12-hour point, but they actually marked it as 6C?
Oh, I don't even know.
They always do that, yeah.
Roughly 6 hours, but it makes you wonder whether it surely is on its way to getting to that status, but the winds are slower than expected. Obviously good news.
I think the reason why the winds are lower than expected is because it's only just begun this rapid intensification in the last few hours, and so they would have been sitting there for a bit, and now they're going, and now they'll keep increasing at the same rate as the pressure is after that delay started. So when the next mission goes in just before 6C. Could well be a major hurricane. Pressure will probably be in the 950s, although it could be in the 940s if it accelerates. And if it's in the 940s in 6 hours, then I wouldn't like to see what comes later on in the day.
I'm just really interested right now with the satellite imagery because those initial hot towers have blown up into a whole
Yeah.
meshing with the western and southwestern quadrants of the eye wall. So it's, it almost cut off what looked to be a wider eye wall earlier in a way, if that makes any sense, if you had the latest frame in particular. So it's going to be interesting to see if the eye is trying to contract further with that as well, or if it's just shifting around a bit and you're going to see this broaden out a little bit.
It would be really interesting to hear for another eye pass, wouldn't it?
Yeah, because, if you look at, I think an hour ago on the satellite imagery, it was a 22:25 UTC, so it's about an hour, 20 minutes ago. That was when we had an eye closer to 16 nautical miles or so, is what they were saying. Since then, you have that initial hot tower burst completely, I guess, shrink down that size where you'd assume the eye and eye wall is to a considerable degree. When that starts to filter out a bit and we see the eye a bit more circular in shape and visible, it's going to be interesting to see if that's shrunk it down a bit more since.
We're here for another 15 minutes on this live discussion. Start your message with Force 13 all in text for any more questions, and there are a few. Any chance that this just scrapes the northern coast and makes landfall in southern Belize? We had this conversation a few days ago when it was less clear, but there's no avoiding it at this point.
Yeah, Honduras is going to be hit if it misses Nicaragua, where it's not going to manage to go all the way that far north.
Yeah,
Furthest north I would expect is Puerto Lempira, which is in eastern Honduras. In fact, the HWRF has been consistently calling for that to get a direct hit. So, to be honest, we want it to go as far south as possible to get away from that population center.
Yeah. Just for clarification for people asking about that, the cone of uncertainty for the 3-day point, let alone the general 1-day point or 1.5-day point, doesn't include Belize. So the odds of the center tracking there instead are well under 15%, and decreasing really by the hour right now. The new advisory that comes out will be a more certain forecast because there's another 6 hours of time taken away, and models and indications don't indicate at all something like that occurring. So you see those odds continue to drop off more and more. Regardless of the center's location, though, portions of Belize, particularly the southern half of the country, are still going to get very substantial rainfall totals, potentially up to 8 to 12 inches, if I'm not mistaken, from some of the computer model runs and general forecasts. So just because the center isn't tracking there doesn't mean that substantial impacts won't occur and people don't need to prepare. You have more time to prepare there than if you're in eastern Nicaragua and Honduras in particular, where preparations need to be completed tonight. But by tomorrow evening, everything there should also be prepared ahead of the system as well. And just to clarify as well, someone was asking about the kilometers per hour. It's about 160 kilometers per hour sustained winds.
Yep, it's one of the biggest conversion points, 100 miles an hour to 160 kilometers per hour. The easiest to remember, in my opinion. Are they going to change Greek names because of this season? I think they might have to.
Supports that, certainly. Regardless of what they end up doing, I don't think we can carry on using Eta and Iota after the destruction they're going to have brought to Central America.
Just the naming, Beta, Eta, Theta, Zeta, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of.
But then again, this season is just as ridiculous, though.
Well, there's a lot of other questions raining over, how retiring systems work, especially with some of the damage we've seen from some of the Greek storms, but also just, the feasibility of having to reuse certain lists and things. It'll be an interesting conversation in the future, at least, and I'm sure we might have a whole debate segment about it in the off season. But right now, at least, there's some more immediate pressing matters.
It's turned and is now heading towards the center of the storm again, so we should be getting that next pass within the next 10 to 20 minutes.
Okay.
And a question as
we'll
well.
Just miss it, unfortunately.
A question as well historically: has there ever, assuming Iota reaches Category 4, which is forecast, would it be the first time that there's ever been 3 Category 4s in a season past October 1st, or is there a climatological precedence for that?
My.
Well, there's never been 3 majors past October 1st.
Well, there's the answer then.
So yes.
It would be the first time there'd be 3 Category 4s past October 1st, I guess. I mean, that in itself is, extreme to note, really. Just that simple fact.
The
late season activity has been obscene.
Yeah.
Everyone
data is upgraded. We could have seen 5 majors after September.
I mean, you're talking about a season that had not only the most storms recorded in a single month, storms getting named 10 was September, even though the first one technically formed as a tropical depression in the wee hours of August 31st. But you're talking about ridiculous late season activity. 4 storms in October. We're already at 3 here in November, and the number of named storms in November to date is faster than October. So if for some reason that 20% odds of development forms in the southwestern Caribbean Sea in the next 5 days, or a bit past that too, as the GFS is trying to indicate, you're really talking about the records and the pace being absolutely explosive. And really the unfortunate thing too is that as we've headed on later into the season and still had this record-breaking activity, a lot more of these systems have unfortunately been closer to and or impacting land. Gamma, Zeta, Beta, Eta, Iota, all of these systems have been making landfall or bringing substantial impacts to land.
Looking at the wide shot again, this is the Atlantic right now, and you can see obviously Iota dominating proceedings, but the National Hurricane Center at this time also updates the forecast chances for other disturbance in their tropical weather outlooks. They've got a 20% chance. It was there before, but it's still there, 20%, pretty much where Iota is right now. Within the next 5 days, another area of low pressure could form. And great news in the Eastern Pacific, they've dropped it to a low chance in 5 days now for that system on the far right hand side of your screen. 30% chance in 5 days. That was 70% chance yesterday. I was certainly not sold by that given the state of the Eastern Pacific this year, but there we have it, chances way down now. And just a little look at the Western Pacific again, not much going on here. Looking towards the left hand side of the image, you can just about make out the remnants of Vamco, which struck Vietnam in the last 48 hours. Another area that's really been suffering from tropical cyclones this year.
I mean, since October, there's been really 3 hotspots, I guess, for multiple storms coming in. You have Central America now, unfortunately, with Iota coming in. You had the Yucatan Peninsula with Gamma Delta Zeta, and now you're gonna, on top of that, you also have the Philippines and Vietnam, which had I think 4 or 5 different named storms come in a 3 to 4 week period. So Vamco as well. We were talking about for Vietnam after its really unexpected intensification phase in the South China Sea, that just like what we're seeing with Iota hitting saturated areas that have been impacted by heavy rainfall from storms recently, other places in the world are seeing very similar issues.
Has the Western Pacific late season been slightly impressive given that we're in a moderate La Nina?
I would say yes.
And there could still be more to come there. Long range, I know we smirk a little bit when we hear the ultra long range models, but they do generally have some degree of truth to them, suggesting there could be an active phase in the Western Pacific as we enter December, so could be another phase to come yet.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one basin that has, for sure activity can occur any time of the year, it's the Western Pacific. So don't rule out potential threats there just because it's typically late in the year and you assume there's less. We've had Knock 10 on Christmas. We've had, even last year, it was a tropical depression. It was 35W. I think it was Usagi going over the Philippines too. So a lot of these systems can happen late in the year. Don't count that part of the year out.
Okay, so again we're looking at the latest imagery. This is the wider shot, sort of the mid-range shot of Hurricane Iota. We don't have the rapid scan that we had earlier because they've moved elsewhere for the time being. We do have the general GOES 16 imagery, and I can tell you at least that as of 15 minutes ago there was no appreciable difference in the storm. Still the extremely high cloud tops on the southern side and the western side. Northeast a little bit lacking, but still we call minus 70 lacking compared to the rest of the eye wall. The eye itself is still fairly invisible, unlike what it was 2 hours ago, but it could pop out at any time, really. Okay, what's the status of recon right now?
Recon is at the latest update 7 minutes ago. They just entered the southeast eye wall. They were just shy of hurricane force as the transmission ended, and so 5 minutes from now, top of the hour, we'll see what the storm's done.
Okay, we'll stay on for that. We'll see what they're getting up to. I'm not sure what else we could speculate about until that occurs, but the latest from the National Hurricane Center, if you missed it, they've upped it to 100 miles per hour, category 2 on the Saffir-Simpson scale, pressure estimate 964, which they got pretty much at the center. It will be really interesting to see if the pressure has gone down much. Kay, what are you really expecting out of this?
I'm personally expecting a 145 mile an hour peak in the low 940s, perhaps the upper 930s.
I mean the next pass.
Oh, the next pass, sorry. I'd expect it to be a millibar or a few lower, and when we finally get into the northwest eye, we'll find some category 2 winds.
Would anyone else like to comment at this point? Cesar, we've not heard from you for a while. I know you had your thoughts earlier on, especially about the situation down there in Central America.
Well, thank you, Nathan. But well, I don't really know what else I can bring on the table unless everything that we know so far yet.
Yeah.
But well, you know, some cloud bands of Iota, the western part of the storm, are already over
Yep.
the border of Nicaragua and Honduras. So practically, this is going to be the beginning of a new terrific nightmare, very bad nightmare for them. Well, you know, with this rate of intensification, I don't know what else we can actually expect.
Well, in
Only
terms of
that-
rainfall, it's already begun now, hasn't it, on the coast there?
Yeah, possibly. Well, very high thunderstorm activity and some rainfall, at least in those parts in the coast of Nicaragua and Honduras border. And well, the storm is not quite big, but of course, it practically has the size of Nicaragua and Honduras at least. So practically, it's going to be a total affection for those regions. It's going to be a very dangerous situation. And just to remind that the mudslides and the flooding are going to be the main threat for those regions, because they are very full of mountains and hills, which is practically the main reason of why high death tolls are in those regions, unfortunately.
Now, I'm just bringing it back to the old imagery here. This isn't up to date anymore. This is about an hour old now, but I just want to point out the islands. On the left-hand side, that shape there, fairly round-shaped island, is Providencia, and that is exactly 100 miles away from the center of the storm now, which is 160 kilometers. To its south is the island of San Andres, which is currently 135 miles from the center of the storm's eye. So it's drawing much closer to both of these locations. And for those who are wondering, the storm right now is exactly 247 miles away from the landfall zone of Eta the other week.
And you know, the unfortunate thing too is could make landfall ending up in a pretty similar area. Not exactly the same, more likely than not, but you know, still close approach means that such a similar area is probably going to get at least strong tropical storm force winds, despite the wind field not being particularly large. If they get particularly unlucky, they're going to get hurricane force winds in the places that experience worse wind.
Reconnaissance data is in. We have a Category 2 SFMR in the southeast eye wall, 84 knots. Flight level winds peaked at 83 knots. Extrapolated pressure is below 960.
Wow.
You said below 960?
Below 960. And I'm not certain we got to the very center of the storm. I'm not certain because I don't think we got quite to the center of the eye, but it stopped at 959.4.
Wow.
So that's another, I think, 3 millibars about from extrapolated since the last pass, and unclear whether or not that's going to be the lowest reading yet.
You would add about 2 millibars to that to account for the error.
Yeah, so you have
not
9...
likely to be sub 960 in actual pressure with the drop sond, but going fast.
Yeah. I mean, even so, you have 961 and 962 millibars there, and it's still not 100% clear if that's the lowest reading yet. The last update, you know, which was about, you know, an hour ago on terms of the last pass before that, was 964 is the real pressure. So you're still talking about, you know, around 2 millibars to 2.5 millibars an hour intensification right now.
Okay, do you think we should wait up for another observation?
If we wait 10 minutes, we'll have the northwest eye wall, and I think we could see some winds higher than what we've currently seen.
Okay, we'll stay on for that. Good time to send in your questions right now. Start your message with Force 13 all in text, and we can deal with all your inquiries. We've pretty much covered all aspects of the storm through our natural discourse, so we'll wait to see what other comments people can bring in and what we can talk about. But still, at this point, the storm is continuing pretty much west, very, very slight northward element. National Hurricane Center, I think, had it, was it 9 miles per hour or 8 miles per hour? In the last hour, it has moved 17 miles, but they average it out, of course, over about a 6-hour period. What would happen if we ran out of Greek names? I think they should use names of National Hurricane Center staff, personally, but I don't think that will catch on.
Pet names of the people who work in the National Hurricane Center.
I don't think we know is the real answer.
There isn't a procedure in place.
There isn't a procedure.
We don't know, but I'd like it to be the periodic table. That's just a personal thing.
Oh, okay. I'm seeing something very interesting
Go
from the
ahead.
data. It seems that in the last hour, the storm has moved south of due west.
Whoa.
Might be wobbling as it intensifies.
Yes, it has wobbled actually in the last hour there. It's gone west-southwest there. I can just see it on... You can just catch that movement, the very last frames as it gets dark. It's a west-southwest movement in that last hour.
And I just want to know as well, just from the prior discussions of that, you know, a conclusion point. To really get past the Greek naming list, you need 46 total named storms in a season to go past it. So, despite some conversation, the odds of that ever happening, even in such an insane year as this, you'd need to have, you know, another probably almost dozen named storms total to eclipse that.
Yep, even a season like this isn't going to get close. I think we're looking at, after Iota, probably a maximum of 3. Famous last words, but you would think, as we get very close to the end of the Atlantic hurricane season's official bounds, that we shouldn't get more than 3 storms after this.
If for some reason we got all 3 of those, you're at 33 total named storms in the year, you'd still need another 13 to then exhaust the Greek naming list and then have to have an extra one from somewhere else at the end. So
yeah,
you know, they might change how they name things just because of, you know, convention, considering everything that we've seen in the past couple of years. But, you know, I don't think we're ever getting to that point.
Let's take some more questions. There's been quite a few. Questions about retirements, we're not really going to take questions about that because, you know, first of all, the information isn't all clear just yet from all the storms that have occurred, and I don't think it's the right time. What are the best, most expected, and worst case scenarios for Iota's future in terms of intensity and track? It's pretty clear, really. The best case scenario is that it stops right where it is. That's not going to happen.
Best case scenario would be gets to a minimal Cat 3, starts an idle replacement cycle, weakens to a Cat 2, makes landfall and weakens quicker than expected over the mountains, moving faster than anticipated to produce as little rainfall as possible. Worst case scenario would be obviously moving slower to produce more rainfall.
Yeah.
But I'd say the worst case scenario is still a Category 5 peak.
Yeah.
It's still possible, as much as I hate to admit it.
Will the Caribbean disturbance become a hurricane?
Still too far out to
odds
say.
on this one?
After this one, yeah.
I mean, it's got a 20% chance of becoming a tropical depression in the next 5 days, and there's only one major model that picks up on developing it, and it doesn't have to become a hurricane. So you're probably substantially less than 20% for that.
Even though we've had more depressions in 2005, why haven't we seen as many Category 5 hurricanes? Asks Andrew.
Luck.
Because we already
Yeah.
had many Category 5 hurricanes.
Missed opportunities, I think.
That's a fair-
bit of intra-seasonal factors that, regardless of how favourable a season is, if you've got some shear caused by typhoon activity in the West Pacific, you're not going to get a Category 5 in the open Atlantic. Or if you have a trough that's slightly too far east in the Gulf of Mexico, that storm that gets to 155 won't make it all the way to 160. Random high pressure over the Bahamas, Delta didn't get there because of that. It's a bit very lucky.
I think still despite that, though, you know, it's important to note the Atlantic doesn't typically have Category 5s every year in the first place, despite the number of named storms this year. You know, the fact we had, I think, operationally 4 years in a row Category 5 systems, you know, that's very rare. So, you know, if we're talking chronologically, it's not surprising to see that streak broken despite the number of systems that have formed this year. Regardless of that, though, we've ended up seeing many storms break or get near intensification records, Delta and Eta in particular being the two most notable ones in that regard. And we've still seen many storms cause very substantial land impacts despite not having one officially reach that, you know, upper category in the Atlantic basin this year. So I think despite any exact intensities, you know, there's still a lot of damage that has unfortunately occurred, particularly since the start of September and October.
There was a question there about where we're all broadcasting from. Well, this is basically a network of people right now who are broadcasting all from all different locations, out to all different locations. I'm here where it all gets, what's the word? It's all orchestrated from, here in the UK. But we have several other streamers who sometimes take the operations in the US and Australia and beyond. It should be just a few more minutes till we get the next info.
Yes, a couple of minutes. But in the meantime, we've just had a brand new microwave image come in from half an hour ago.
Oh, okay. Let's see if we can mull over this then. Right then, Kay, tell us about it.
Well, as you can see, the eye has gotten a bit smaller compared to the last run. The eye wall has become much more well defined. There's a very impressive band feeding into it, which is basically providing extra moisture to fuel the convection if it needed any more to begin with. And it's close to closing off that little gap, and that might be why the northeast eye wall was slightly weak when the plane went through. That gap would have been what it
still
went
seems
through.
to be.
Yeah, so it found 90 miles an hour while going through the gap. If that gap hadn't been there, it might well have been stronger. And this is what they mean when they talk about undersampling.
Yes.
You can go through where the strongest winds should be, but if you happen to chance it at a point where the winds have dropped off temporarily, you won't get them.
We'll try and do some more quickfire questions here. How many more named storms do you think that we can have in December?
2.
2?
That's the record.
I'm inclined to agree with that. Do you believe that Iota could have a pinhole eye under the central dense overcast? You've sort of set against that, haven't you?
It's not a pinhole, but it's certainly small. It could contract into a pinhole if it continues intensifying over, say, the next 12 or 18 hours, but it wouldn't be an instantaneous process by any means.
Daniel points out, did you know that if you count only the Greek names, it's practically a full normal season with 9 named storms, 5 hurricanes, and 3 majors?
Yes, it is.
That is
Yeah.
incredible.
Wow.
Really means because Greek alphabet really begins when you're at, I guess, double normal in a way, or close to double. Must have 3 full average seasons fit
3
into
full
one.
seasons. Yeah.
And that's really insane to think of.
We have the northwest eye wall,
Okay.
Oh.
and it seems the microwave foretold the future. You noted it. It appears that we've got a bit of a gap thing going on where the winds aren't quite as high as you'd expect them to be. 93 knot flight level, 81 knot SFMR.
But this is northwest, right?
This is northwest, so
I'm
if
a
the
little
storm,
bit
if
more
the, if the
surprised.
plane had enough fuel to make another pass and went through the northeast, it would probably find winds a lot higher than it did the first time round.
I don't know. Northeast still looks the same as it did before, a little bit lacking. Northwest looks better, personally. I think I'm surprised they haven't got higher up there.
Well,
The thing
as far as
is-
we can tell, the highest SFMRs have happened in the southeast.
Southeast,
It
the
should be the
least,
weakest.
the least likely.
Yes.
The thing is that that microwave imagery is about 40 minutes old now, 35 to 40 minutes old. So since that more gap feature would have rotated a bit more to the west and be more in the northwestern quadrant, and the stronger portion would of that eyewall, which looks to be more in the southwest and south, would have been around the southeastern side by the time the plane flew through there. So it does make more sense than it would have originally seemed.
Do you subscribe to that?
So it's unfortunate that we don't have a recon base that's nearer so the planes can do more than 2 passes. But yeah, I think if the plane went through the northeast and then northwest one for the final time, they'd find winds higher than they have in the penetrations they've done.
And this is really the fortunate thing, at least, though, that we have recon in the first place to confirm such things like microwave in that regard to show, there's a bit more of a wind gap here, or this intensity is the exact one.
Absolutely.
Someone asked a question a little earlier saying, wouldn't Eta have been a Cat 5 just based on satellite estimates if there wasn't recon, like if it was in the Western Pacific? And I think we could say if it was just in the Western Pacific and you didn't have
It would have been
any...
close.
It would have been close, but you'd be much more likely to say, "Oh, this was one," rather than having the recon definitively confirm Eta was not a Category 5. So
Yes.
that's one of the fortunate things, at least, is despite a base being further away, and we only get a couple passes, and we see that a lot in the Eastern and Central Pacific too. We're actually able to get that data in the first place to get more conclusive evidence, and that really helps people prepare ahead of time when they need to.
Well, we're finishing our coverage here at this point. The storm is continuing to intensify. Recon appears to be getting that information. Maybe not quite as much as we're expecting wind-wise. And I leave off with a post that someone made. I've just lost it now, but someone was saying that I'm losing my words already. The Greek alphabet has been more active than the 2014 Atlantic hurricane season. Ouch. Well, there we have it. We'll have more updates on this storm as it approaches the coast of Central America, which certainly doesn't need another storm like this. Unfortunately, it's going to get one, and we will have regular updates on our social platforms. Search Force 13 on Facebook and Twitter. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more video updates, and you can communicate in real time on our Discord server, discord.gg/Force13, with our fairly large community now of weather watchers as well as hurricane trackers as well. All kinds of people in there. That's it from us tonight. We'll see you again soon. Good night.